Thank you so much for coming today. This is another second time dream come true that we get to assemble even huger crowd of people who care about the same things I care about. This sort of thing, like local first, data syncing, etc., that's kind of been what I've been thinking about most over the last couple of years. And I've been exploring all of those different sync systems, etc., and I couldn't be more fascinated by each of them. But there's kind of like one particular approach that I was always very curious about that I wanted to explore for my apps. So I wanted to sync different. So to get this pun out of the way, I'm Johannes Schickling. I'm based here in beautiful Berlin. To give you an idea of like when people ask me, hey, what are you doing? That's sort of a non-straightforward answer. Now I hope I have a better answer. So I'm building over-engineering studio. Someone on YouTube accused me of over-engineering. I now wear it as a badge of honor. Over-engineering studio, sort of like a little product studio where I'm building Overtone and also do some open source working on LiveStore. I'm also the host of Local First FM, and in the past I've been the founder of Prisma. So today I want to spend quite a bit of time on motivating why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. A lot of that is about state management, and then a particular approach to state management involving event sourcing. So based on the feedback I've gotten for trialing this talk, there's been kind of two groups of people, like the ones that are like already like event sourcing pilled and the ones that are like had no idea what is event sourcing. So who in the audience is like completely new to event sourcing? Okay, so for those of you, this might fly a little bit over your head, but maybe at the best, I think, maybe this gets you curious about event sourcing. I had to hear it many, many times, and when I read Martin Kleppmann's book, this is where it finally really started to click for me and got me really intrigued. So hopefully this gets you curious, and for those who already know about event sourcing, this is maybe an actual implementation you can use. Then I want to show a demo of LiveStore in action with syncing, and then I want to dive a little bit more into LiveStore, and there might be a special thing at the end. So all of that is motivated with me working on Overtone. That's really my North Star for building my entire data foundation. Overtone is the third-party music client. Won't talk too much about that today, but that's sort of like the main app I'm working on. And I'm making all my design decisions around like what I need for Overtone, as that's a pretty sophisticated app that needs a principal data layer. And this is what Overtone looks like in action. The main focus, the main point here is like I wanted to have like native grade performance, even though I'm using web technologies. And yeah, so to get the bad news out of the way for people who are asking me when can I use Overtone, I wish I could give you a good answer. The confession I have to make is I didn't really work much on Overtone over the last year, as I was kind of busy making LiveStore local first and not just local only. So I feel both amazing about the progress I've made on LiveStore, but I'm also really longing to make more progress on Overtone again, which I'm planning to do after the conference. So, disclaimer, data is kind of the ultimate topic where it depends applies. So this is all, there's no free lunch, no silver bullets, it's all about trade-offs. Again, I'm making my trade-offs around the way how I'm building Overtone and what I need for that. You might have very different trade-offs. Maybe you have some similar trade-offs to me. I'm trying to argue for those. And my trade-offs have also changed over years. Like in the past, when I founded Prisma, my goal was really to make things easy, to make databases easy. And over time, kind of like that easy part has kind of shifted in the background, and I'm really going for one thing, which is making things simple. Since when you build a complex thing, then you're like way beyond like day one of building your app and getting off the ground, but then you have like really tricky situations you need to deal with, and you need to drill down to the almost atomic level of like how does this thing work, and I think this is where we can't do better than simple. And I think this is even more true with AI in the future. So LiveStore is not trying to be the easiest solution off the shelf that works for every use case. I wanted something that allows me to build my particular app use case, gives me all the power I need, and is simple to reason about and easy to use. So speaking of simplicity, that brings me back to over a decade ago, where I was introduced to one of the simplest systems and most beautiful systems I can think of. Has its flaws, but I think the ideas are still, to this day, absolutely marvelous. And React showed me how simple a pretty messy, complex domain could be. I've built pretty big systems with jQuery in the past, and it was an absolute revelation how simple React really can make this messy domain of UI state management, of UI view building, etc., and bring a bit of order into this mess of how dynamic front-end apps are. And it expressed so by saying, hey, the UI is how you render your app for a given state. And I think that just blew my mind back then, and still very profound for me. But in reality, while that is a very simple answer, we've been kind of in this, as an industry, now been wrestling, how do we do the state thing for over the last 10 years? And I think we are all here interested in a particularly more client-centric approach, given we're building local-first apps, but obviously there's also a lot of explorations, how do you do state management more on the server. But yeah, this has really been at the core of my question as well. I want a super fast app, I want synchronous renders, and how do I make the state thing happen that I can get those performance goals that I'm reaching for? And one way how I can build apps where things might get a little bit out of control is where your state management becomes so complex that it kind of accidentally turns your app into a database. And Carl here has written an excellent blog post that argues that we should not accidentally build databases, we should work on apps. And I've been on a similar exploration in the past with my friends Jeff Litt and Nicholas Schiefer, where we worked on Riffle. And the premise of Riffle was hey, let's actually use an off-the-shelf database, in this case SQLite, and embrace that for our state management in our application. In this case, we added reactivity and all sorts of nice things on top of it. And using a database gives us a very elegant way to think about state in our app, where the state we're interested in for a given view, for a given component, is just how we query that, how we query a database. And that, for me, was a very satisfactory answer to how I should think about state. But now, that raised another question. How do we do this database thing? And there's many degrees of freedom how that could be done, but that's kind of been the main question I've been exploring over the last year. And this doesn't need just to be answered on a single client, but it also needs to be answered in a way that works across clients, that I can collaborate with myself on multiple devices, but also collaborate with other users, share data, etc. So that's been the main question that I was trying to figure out. And the first approach I was starting to look into, just because they're off-the-shelf technologies for that, etc., is to trying to directly replicate that database. So in that case, changes to the database would be just normal insert statements, update statements, etc., triggered from the UI, directly applied to the database, reactively driving the state of our application. And that's pretty fine. And it even works across multiple clients, where one client would trigger a certain update that was replicated then to the primary database somewhere in the cloud, and then propagated further to multiple other clients. And that's okay, but it had one very critical trade-off that I was not quite willing to make, which is that this is fundamentally based on mutable state. And if you ask me, this is sort of I'd rather go a long way and do something else than do mutable state. And I want to argue for why that is. When I found building a larger system, and there's data gets duplicated, etc., and that becomes a mess. And I always come back to hey, what is the source of truth of this data? This is where it becomes really hard to reason about, like, hey, why did this data change? Why did the state change? Particularly when you write asynchronous code, you depend on other things. When you do this collaboratively, why did this, not just when did it change, why did it change? And all of those problems get just so much more tricky when you think about that in a collaborative environment where you collaborate with different users, multiple devices. How do you even deal with a merge conflict beyond last write wins? And there are key questions there. How do you capture the user intent? And how do you deal with things like undo, redo, etc.? So I needed a different approach. And remembering back particularly to the beginnings of React, I think there was a really interesting approach already that was introduced way back, like over 11 years ago in 2014, by the Facebook team, where they introduced the Flux architecture. Anyone remember the Flux architecture? Yes, okay. So the Flux architecture gave us a simple answer to this by basically bringing a little bit more reason into the way how this loop works by not just mutating state directly, but by separating this into views and actions. Most notably, this is where Redux came into play. I think the ideas of Redux are beautiful. Redux has its own flaws and problems. But to slightly simplify the terminology here is that instead of calling it a view, we're just calling it the state. And then the UI commits all sorts of events, like through user interactions, etc. And those events are then being reduced into state. And this is a very simple idea, but it goes a long, long way to address the problems I was facing by separating the great powers here. Not state and church, but state and events. And we can reduce the events into state and therefore separate reads and writes. And that was really what I was going after. So the benefits of Redux, or the benefits of event sourcing, what this really is like that it makes it simple to understand why something changed, when something changed, and by eliminating mutable state. The state itself is immutable, the events are immutable, and it's very easy to reason about. And we get even superpowers such as time travel debugging, which you might remember from Redux DevTools. And the best thing for me is like whenever I see await or async await, I get a little bit scared because I know then here I'm dealing with like a raw distributed systems where like it gets tricky. And when you're reducing events to state, that's a pure function. When you commit events, that's a pure function. When you render the state to UI, it's a pure function. So it's very easy to reason about. And that's something that I really like. So I was basically over the last year thinking, once I kind of really settled on the idea, let's use a database to tame the complexity of my state management and to separate the reads and writes. Can we combine those ideas into a single system? So this is what I've been exploring over the last year, and that led me to the approach of like actually indirectly syncing the database through event source syncing. And that is essentially the architecture behind LiveStore. So we've combined those two ideas by reactively querying a database to get our state. But that database is not directly mutated from the UI, but indirectly by the UI using this Redux idea, committing events, and those events are then materialized into the database, which drives the reactivity loop. And again, here we get the best of both worlds, where everything here is a pure function, no async anywhere, super easy to reason about, very composable, and that is really like what attracted me intuitively kind of to this architecture, and then I worked my way back to making it actually work. So what's really cool about this is this doesn't just work locally in this reactivity loop, but this also, the same idea, works globally across multiple devices, across multiple clients. And here, again, we don't sync the database directly. We're syncing the events with a very Git-style methodology, where we are pushing and pulling the events. We're committing the events, and we're pushing them, and other clients pull the events. Very simple to reason about, and as developers, we are already Git-pilled anyway. And yeah, that is really the foundation of like how I've built event source syncing. What this gives me is it makes data very easy to reason about, and therefore this gives me the simplicity I was looking for. It makes it easy to debug. I can always replay. If I end up in a weird buggy situation, I can capture the events, replay, and debug it. Also makes it very easy to test. It makes it much easier to evolve the system, as I can always derive a new database from a given event log with different materializers. So I don't need to do any manual database migrations, and it's very easy to operate. And some of the best parts here, again, to repeat, there's no await anywhere in how you deal with state. You always get synchronously results from your SQLite database, and the distributed systems problems are fully isolated into LiveStore. There is no need for manual optimistic updates, as you might know from React Query or a system like that. Has full offline support, and given it's using SQLite, it's very fast. Also to note, this is not a silver bullet. Like, using event sourcing comes with all sorts of other trade-offs. It's all about trade-offs. I'm arguing here for the trade-offs that I prefer for Overtone, and you should explore them and see whether they're attractive to you as well. So, introducing LiveStore. LiveStore is a client-centric, and that's really important. That's why it's underscored it compared to other local-first technologies, which are more encompassing also very much the server. LiveStore is very client-centric, and it's a local-first data layer based on event sourcing and reactive SQLite. Given it's based on Riffle, which set a really high bar for fast reactivity, I'm using it to build an app that aims to be 120 FPS and gives me transactional state management, etc. Now it has Git-inspired syncing. I've always put a big focus on a great developer experience, and LiveStore comes even with first-class dev tools. And I've been working on it for a while now, for over 4 years at this point. LiveStore is pluggable, so it has adapters for various platforms, for web, for Expo, now also for Node and Bun. It has sync backend implementations using Cloudflare workers, one for Electric SQL, and if you want, you can also easily roll your own. And there are framework integrations for React, Solid, someone contributed Vue last week. So I think no matter which framework you're using, LiveStore is working pretty well. So the scary moment, the demo. Let's see how this is working. So what we see here is a to-do MVC app. You've probably seen this many, many times before. But let's take a look at how the code looks like for this. So this is a React example. And in this React example, as most React libraries, you start with a provider. And that provider takes two things. Is the code big enough for everyone? Great. So it starts with an adapter. The adapter here, in this case, we're using the web adapter, which persists data into OPFS. But there's also an adapter for Expo, for Node, wherever you want to run your code. And then we have a schema. And the schema really captures everything how the app thinks about data. There's two parts to a schema. There are events, and there is state. So events capture and model how data can be changed for your given application. So in this to-do MVC app, we have events for when a to-do was created, when it was completed, uncompleted, etc. And this just captures the schema of what sort of to validate the data and to send it across the wire. And from those events, we want to ultimately derive our state, which are expressed here as SQLite tables. So we have one SQLite table for to-dos, and we even have a SQLite table for some UI state that we want to keep persistent. And later, we materialize those events into the SQLite state using these materializers. They're like Redux reducers, except that they're mutating the database instead of giving you a state result directly. And so that is being then just constructing a LiveStore that can be used. And let's take a look at the actual app and see it in action. So I won't reveal this yet, but if we do something, drink coffee, so we can do some tasks, we can check them, and all of this is already fully working offline. I'm currently tethered, but this would work offline. And this is already syncing. Across here, we're using 2 different browsers. So this is working with syncing, which I'm really excited about. And the last thing I'll throw in here as well is that this has an Expo adapter as well. So this gives us syncing across all of the platforms. Just to show you a few other parts about this, one thing that I'm really excited about, as I've been dog fooding this myself over the last couple of years, and when I'm working on a web app, something that's really important to me is like always knowing what's going on. So that I can like debug the UI state here, that I can like run something in the console, etc. And I was always missing like knowing what's going on in the state of my data. And that's why I've built LiveStore DevTools as well, which are baked into here directly, either as a Chrome extension or they can just be opened as a separate tab. And those LiveStore DevTools give you an up-to-date view here into what's going on into the state of your database. So it's a little bit small, but I hope you get the idea. So as I'm changing something in real time here, this is always up to date. And gives us a good idea what's going on. And it even works for UI state like this. So new to-do, and if I'm reloading this, this captures even the to-do state from here, which you can debug from the DevTools. And as you're changing anything, you can see anything that's changing here in the event log, and also see the current sync state as that's syncing across clients. So developer experience, really, really important for me, which is why I'm always treating this as a first-class citizen. So with the demo out of the way, let's move back to the slides. So just to recap, this is really the entire LiveStore API that you're using as a developer, building an app with LiveStore. You define your events, you define the state that you're interested in, you connect it through materializers. That's your schema. Then you're constructing a store, in this case, here using the React provider. And then you can happily query and commit away, and LiveStore takes care of the rest. Obviously, there's many hook points, how you can handle authentication and like tweak various things to your liking, but that's really like the simple API as it is, and I'm really happy about that. Briefly walking through how LiveStore works on a client, just to walk through together like the event sourcing idea here. In this to-do app, we start here with a single event, to-do created, which is materialized into the SQLite state. As we commit a new event, here to-do completed, that's added to the event log and is directly applied to the SQLite database where it's flipping on the completed flag. And that's the same simple idea how it works over time with like running through the various events. And it's making it super easy to understand and debug if something is going wrong. Syncing, as mentioned, I've been following the ideas of Git as much as applicable to your application domain. What's really cool about LiveStore is that it supports merge conflicts beyond last write wins. So you can provide your own custom resolution logic in your app, how you want to deal with merge conflicts, and even involve the user how to resolve those. And it's really easy to get started with syncing as well. You can deploy an electric sync backend in less than 5 minutes, a Cloudflare worker, and there are more coming in the future. I would love to dive a lot deeper into all the interesting aspects of using LiveStore in production. I don't have time for that. Would love to talk more about rebasing, how persistence works, client-side events, client-side, server-side clients, and all of those things. I don't have time for that. I have even less time to talk about the challenges and open research questions. But if you're interested in any of that, please come to talk to me, since I only have a few more seconds probably left to talk about one more thing, which is that LiveStore so far was a closed source repo. But today, I'm very, very excited to announce that LiveStore is now open source. And I couldn't have done that alone. So I'm deeply, deeply thankful for all the early users who contributed invaluable feedback, and also already assembled a small group of contributors who really materially helped LiveStore make it better. I want to say thank you to all the partners who really believed in me and who collaborated with me on LiveStore, supported LiveStore materially, also to all the sponsors so far. Yeah, a really heartfelt thank you. If you want to get involved, give it a try. My goal with this is to build this as a sustainable open source project. I'm looking for design partners if you want to build your product on it. I'm also welcoming anyone who wants to help maintain LiveStore and contribute to it. And yeah, if you want to consider sponsoring it, that would help me stay afloat. And with that out of the way, a few things to recap. I would encourage you to see whether SQLite could be an interesting fit to tame state complexity in your app. Maybe event sourcing could be interesting to think through as a data architecture. And if you want to combine those two, you can give LiveStore a try. So thank you very much.